here today because my baby sister is buried here. I say baby sister, but she's actually older than me. My mother lost 2 babies before I was born, and that's part of the story of how I came to Islam. Because my mom wanted to have a child so much, even though she'd gone through such loss, such heartache, such hardship, she prayed for a baby. She also asked some Muslims who happened to be from her ethnic background, Croatian Muslims who are on their way to Hajj, if she could have a baby. She said, please pray for me. I really want to have a baby. And so this is the start of my story, because although it started out of hardship, prayer came into it, and a baby was born. I was born in the 2nd week of Ramadan in Beirut, Lebanon. I was born in a place where the adhan was called. I was born in a place where I heard Arabic every day. And even as a child, I would do dhikr. When I was a small child, we had a coffee grinder that was on the ground, and it has the long wooden handle. And I would beat it into the coffee grinder, and I'd say, Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah, as a little child. So my life started surrounded by Islam. My life started because of the prayers of Muslims. And my life started out of hardship, but into happiness and joy for my parents. So I was an only child, because after my parents had me, they were happy and satisfied, and they didn't want to try again. And so I grew up overseas mostly, and having the opportunity to learn different languages, having the opportunity to see different cultures, different lifestyles, and really having the opportunity to be around a lot of adults, actually. So I kind of grew up as maybe a little bit of a mature child, a little bit more serious than my peers. So around the age of 14, 15, I started wanting to know God more. And one of the impetuses for that desire to get closer to God, desire to know God, was that I had seen a video back home at my mother's parish in her hometown of Lackawanna, New York, near Buffalo. In that video, I saw 6 young people who were having visions of Mary, and I was very touched by this video. I felt it was serious. I felt her message was sincere, and I felt called to answer her request. And this is what she was asking of people. She was saying, seek God, try to get close to God, pray often, remember her son, and pray for peace for the world, and pray for the world to wake up to the awareness of God. These were her messages. And when I first heard these messages, they were very general, they were very broad, they could apply to anybody, anywhere. But something else is so important about this exposure to this event. Clearly, from the beginning of this experience, I believed that the unseen is real, and that the unseen can communicate with us. That it's not fictitious, that it's not a fantasy, that the material world is not all there is. So from the beginning, I realized that this is the truth. There is a reality beyond our physical world, and I can hear them calling me, and I wanted to respond. And so that's what started me on my path to seeking proximity to God, to seek closeness to God, to find out who God really was. I really wanted to know, who's God, and what is His message, and what does He have for us? And that's what started me on my journey. My mother and father are both from New York State, and they incidentally met in Bonn, Germany, because my father was working for the American Embassy in Germany, and my mother had just moved there to begin working as well. And they met one another, and shortly after that they got married. So my mom worked primarily as a secretary in the State Department or overseas in the embassies for a period of time until she started trying to have a family. And my father was a communications officer with the embassy. So I grew up, again, all over the world with opportunities to see Beirut, Lebanon, opportunities to see Paris, Rome, Philippines, Manila, Philippines. So we always had the opportunity to be around other cultures, other languages, and so on. My mom and dad personally were very decent people. They weren't people who were interested in foolish things. They weren't excessively interested in parties or socializing. They weren't big drinkers at all. In fact, I rarely ever saw them have alcohol. So they're very down-to-earth people. They're very sincere, very hardworking, very strong. Emotionally, they're very balanced people. And so I grew up in a very stable, happy, healthy environment with a lot of opportunities for learning, lots of opportunities for cultural experiences. My mom was very committed to giving me the opportunity to see things that she didn't have a chance to see as a child. So we would often go to the theater. We would often travel to different places. She loved to take me to enjoy the cuisine of different countries and different places. So we always were out and about and just experiencing life. My father is a very gentle person, very even-tempered, hardly ever lost his temper. I mean, I could probably remember once when I was a child. So I was around very healthy, balanced people, and I think that is part of why I've been able to do what I've done in my life and to become who I am. Another thing that they did for me, my father was the one who used to take me to the library, take me to the parks, take me out to the museums. So we were always able to do family activities, to be enriched. Every opportunity there was, we took advantage of it. And my dad was also a very creative person. He's an artist. He draws, he paints, and so was his father, a very talented artist. And he was actually also very artistic in the stage and also in singing, although that kind of dwindled over the years, but that's something he really enjoyed. So he's a very expressive person. So he would often tell me stories and read books to me. But I would always say to him, Dad, I want you to tell me the story from your mouth. Because he would make up a story, and it would be so much more rich and so beautiful, and we'd have all those opportunities to be together. So every time I think of the library when I was little, I always see him. And he's the one who would take me there and read books to me, and we'd get books and so on. So it was a healthy childhood, balanced childhood, and one of the other things my parents really pushed me to do was work hard at school. They wanted me to achieve, they wanted me to excel, and whenever I'd come home with mediocre grades as even a young elementary school child, they would say, this is not good enough, you can do better, you can be better, you can do more, and they would push me. If my handwriting was sloppy, my father said, you can do better, this is not good enough, you can do better, I know it, you have it within you. So they always would say, you are capable of more, you are capable of understanding, you are capable of doing better, producing better, and so on. So I've always been a serious student because of their encouragement. And I think that's also a really big theme in my life in terms of my interest in Islam and my interest in studying, because as a Muslim, I have never stopped learning. I always want to know. I always want to know why. I want to know what. I want to know how. I want to know the meaning of this religion. I didn't pick it for convenience sake. I didn't pick it to follow along with someone else. I didn't pick it because anyone forced me to. I wanted to know this. And because of this drive to learn and drive to achieve that my parents instilled in me, I continue that in my life as a Muslim. And I do that for my children as well, whom I homeschool. So after I'd seen this video about the miracles at Medjugorje, I really took it very seriously, and I started going back to the Catholic Church. And I started going to confession and attending Mass. And even my mom wasn't that interested at the time, so it was myself. I went by myself, basically. And I would go, and I'd be waiting to know about God. And waiting. And waiting. And my answers were not being, my questions rather, were not being answered. My knowledge wasn't growing. And my desire to have that proximity to God, it wasn't happening. So I decided to look elsewhere. I said, well, this isn't it. And interestingly, at the time, the New Age movement, as was so-called New Age movement, was growing, where basically people were looking at the spiritual nature of life, looking at how can one find a path to God outside of dogma, outside of religious traditions that might have gone astray, because there's many people out there who are unhappy with traditions that have become dry, dead, meaningless, or dogmatic, or the pressure to conform. You know, people are, in many places around the world, are seeking something better. And so I began to read in the genre of the New Age movement, or what's also called the metaphysical movement. And basically, what were the ideas that I learned? Well, that God is ever present, and that you can connect with God. Well, there's my first answer of what I've been seeking. That's what I wanted to know. I wanted to know that God is ever present and available to me, and that I can connect with him. My answer was received. So then what else did I learn? And interestingly, I met a family where the mother and father were very much into meditation. And I saw in this family a peace and a tranquility and a balance that I hadn't observed before and I hadn't felt before. And I was very impressed by their character, and I was very impressed by the potential to develop that in myself. So I looked into a church that was in my area, and it was called Arlington Metaphysical Chapel in Arlington, Virginia. And it just so happened that they had many of the things I was looking for. The message that they had was that God is ever present. In fact, the reverend who led the church used to say, God, 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 there is naught else but God. La ilaha illallah, basically. So I was down with that. I liked that. I was like, yes, God, 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 there's naught else but God. Yes. All right, what was the next thing I learned? That you can have this connection, that you don't need an intermediary, that you can ask God to come towards you. You can plead towards God and ask for help and assistance. Another big message was that life is a test, and the experiences you have in this world are meant for your growth, whether they're challenging or whether they're not challenging, that they're all part of your lesson, and you should be approaching each of these events in your life as someone who is on a journey to grow and to change. And this was a strong theme. So every week that I would go to this church, they would emphasize this in every sermon, looking at your challenges in life, looking at their shortcomings, and trying to connect with God and understand the message of what he's giving you in your life. So essentially that was like what I learned in Islam, which is trying to follow the will of Allah and understanding how it's playing out in your life. So that was a strong theme. Another theme that I learned there was when it came to the time to accept the donations, we would take them up to the altar and we'd say a verse, or we'd sing it actually, but we'd say, we give thee but thine own, whatever the gift may be, all that we have is thine alone. Ah, trust, O Lord, in thee. Very Islamic message too. So I say to people that this place, although it's a different environment, it's technically a somewhat Christian environment, although they looked at the scriptures of many religions and brought it into the services. It was a training for me in Islamic thinking and in Islamic principles, because these ideas are definitely some of the big ideas in Islam as well. And I think it was preparing me for this transition. And it was answering those questions that I had. What is God all about? What is the purpose of life? What am I supposed to do with myself? And can I connect with God? Can I understand that the unseen world has an impact on me, and how can I relate to it? Another thing that I learned there, and that really I was attuned to, because having grown up Catholic, I actually never realized, believe it or not, that they believed Jesus was God. It never even occurred to me that a human being could be God. So I never believed that. And one time, before I had encountered this other church, I was standing in a Catholic Mass, and the preacher said, and the priest rather says, and Jesus is God. What? I couldn't believe it. I said, did I just hear him correctly? So clearly from the beginning, it was never in me, this notion. I never had to correct that idea, because that idea was never in me, that was possible. It never made sense. And in this particular church that I did find, they never taught that Jesus was God. In fact, they taught that he was what they called a master teacher, someone whom you would use as a guide to God. And that is how I looked at him. So I was very comfortable with that. Another thing that was common in this church is that we would get what we called psychic messages or spiritual messages from the reverend or whomever was conducting the service. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't listen to everybody. There was only one person in particular who was really, really pure and really good. His messages were always very positive. And you knew sincerely he wasn't bluffing, he wasn't pretending, he wasn't a charlatan. Really pure-hearted individual. And he was actually the persons who I would go see the most. I would attend his services the most often. And the thing that he did that I loved so much, besides these messages, which I thought were pretty exciting. Oh wow, spiritual world's communicating with you. Yay, isn't that exciting? But the thing that he would emphasize, and a couple of the other reverends would emphasize, is don't rely on us. Don't rely on us. Don't keep coming after us to give you these messages. You work on your connection. Ask God to guide you. They didn't want to become crutches for people. And they always emphasized that. In fact, they would always say to people, after a while of attending this church, we don't want you to come to this service where they would give these messages. They want you to go to the other one where they didn't give messages, and you have to do your own spiritual work. So they really trained you to be active. They really trained you to be moving in your own path instead of relying on other people, which I thought was a great message. But nonetheless, one of the things that this particular reverend had that I valued so much is he would always take whatever scripture he was reading, and he would look at the depth of the meaning, and he would look at how to apply it in your life. So he had this kind of outline form of his lectures. Here's the information, here's the story, here's the meaning, and here's how you use it in your life. 1, 2, 3. And that's just totally what I was looking for. Give me something that I can use. Give me something that's going to help me make some progress in my life. And that's the way I think, and that's the way I approach the work I do as a speaker in Islamic environments today. I want to make it meaningful, I want to make it relevant, and I want to make it doable for whomever is in my audience. So these were great teachers, great lessons that I learned that really moved me along my path. Interestingly, as a side note, I was vegetarian for many years as well, prior to becoming Muslim. And in a way, I feel like being vegetarian, I purified myself from the haram, you know, and I was really preparing myself to become a Muslim. Because I'd been raised overseas, and I'd been raised often by interacting with a lot of adults, I was much more serious and mature than my peers. So I wasn't interested in the same things they were. I never found myself attracted to alcohol. I never found myself attracted to parties. Again, because my parents are my main role model, they weren't like that themselves. This is not the lifestyle they lived. They were decent people, down to earth. You know, people have given my parents gifts of alcohol over the years, and it's still sitting in a cabinet untouched. Like, I don't know, 40 years. I mean, it's never been used. So 30 years, literally. So this is my role model. That was my template, if you will, of how to be. And I just was much more serious than my peers. You know, I took my classes and my studies very seriously. In fact, it's so funny. I didn't realize this, but again, this will reveal how serious of a student I was. But I didn't realize that when you were assigned reading in college, that you didn't actually necessarily have to read every single page that was assigned. But I did. So I was a pretty serious student. Like, I read everything that was ever assigned to me except one book one time that I felt so guilty about. So I was very serious in terms of my work and my study, and I guess that's how I am in general. So when I go to Islamic lectures or I go to events where I'm learning information, when it's told to me, I always feel this impetus to put it into action and to implement it in my life. And so because of this, distractions weren't a big deal for me. I mean, I did listen to music as a child, and because I lived again in Europe, and this was very common, I listened to music. It probably took up a lot of time for me, and I guess as an only child, it was kind of a friend. It was a companion. It was a fantasy world. You can imagine, you know, your life, you know, in those different areas and so on. So, yeah, and then it was later on in college, I met my husband, and when I met him, he was it, and we were committed to one another from the beginning. And so I was very young when I met him, and we decided that we were the ones for each other. And then when we got married, obviously, you know, our life has continued to progress forward. But I've never been interested in wasting my time. You know, the number one question converts or reverts, whatever you'd like to call them, get asked is,